This is Stan Lee coming at you. In other words, Excelsior.
Let's get to it.
The book that kicked off the Silver Age was, I'm sure you recognize this book.
Oh, yeah.
Showcase number 4, 1956. First appearance of Barry Allen as the Flash.
Nice.
Little bit of interesting tidbit, at least for me in my younger days, distinction between the eras of comics were thought of as price. I don't know if that was the same thing for you as a kid. You know, people always said 10-cent books were Golden Age, 12-cent and 15-centers became Silver Age, which turns out to be wrong, because if you take a look at this book, you can see real small, it's got that 10-cent price tag.
Oh, there it is.
And this is the first Silver Age book. And we'll also see later that even when Marvel started out, they started off with a 10-cent book.
Ha.
But yeah, we'll get to that later. But yeah, this is the Holy Grail of the Silver Age. So in the early days, clearly DC was the industry leader in the comic book world, because they came out with the first superhero in Superman with Action Comics #1. They kicked off the Silver Age with Barry Allen Flash. Basically, with the end of the Golden Age, most of the characters got put on the shelf and retired, so to say. So to revitalize comics in the Silver Age, they came out with a lot of new characters. So Flash being one of them. Moving on to the next one, they introduced a new Green Lantern. I don't think we've ever mentioned it, but the first Green Lantern was Alan Scott.
Alan Scott?
From the Justice Society.
I did not know that.
Has no relation to this Green Lantern until much later, where they retconned him in to be part of that universe. This book's starting to heat up too.
Now I hear that they're talking about another movie, perhaps.
They've been talking about another movie for a while. That Ryan Reynolds movie left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, so I think that's kind of why it's been taking so long. They're trying to figure out what direction to go. I personally would like to see Jon Stewart on the screen.
I'm with you on that one.
I think a lot of the younger viewers would appreciate that, because by the time, you know, 90s kids were watching TV and cartoons, Hal Jordan wasn't around anymore. Everything was all Jon Stewart.
That's right.
And you know, we'll talk a little bit more about Jon Stewart when we hit the Bronze Age era, because yeah, there's a lot to talk about with what happened in the 70s. One of the other things that DC was really great with was putting together superhero teams. So Brave and the Bold, number 28, was the first appearance of the Justice League of America. Even though all of these characters had been in their own comic books before, this is the first time that they came together as a team. Prior to this, DC had the Justice Society of America. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
That was, Alan Scott, Green Lantern, Hawkman, Wonder Woman, Jay Garrick, Flash, and so on.
Yep.
So that's the beginning of the Silver Age. Like I said, there are still some characters that had carried over from the Golden Age, which they call the Trinity: Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. But in the Silver Age, their comics just weren't very good. I don't know if we had mentioned how they got kind of goofy. I think on the Batman segment, we talked about how Batman got really goofy.
Yes.
Superman did as well. Not only goofy, but just boring. People just didn't care. They just kept them around because that's their flagship character at the time. Wonder Woman, same thing. You know, just had enough readership to not get canceled. And all of these new characters with Barry Allen, Hal Jordan, putting together the Justice League, that helped a little bit. But it really wasn't until a guy, or a duo by the name of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby came about. And we had mentioned in previous sessions where, you know, started off as Timely Comics, evolved into Atlas Comics, and Now, with Fantastic Four #1, kicks off Marvel Comics, which they got from the name of their very first comic book. And I'm sure you've seen interviews and documentaries with Stan and how a lot of things started. Of course, you get a little bit of one-sidedness in some of those interviews. How they like to take sole credit for everything that happened. But really, it was that book that prompted the editor at Marvel, or now becoming Marvel, to put together a superhero team.
Yes.
Because the Justice League was taking the world by storm.
Sure.
Marvel wanted to compete. So Goodman, who was the publisher or the editor at the time, approached Stanley and Jack Kirby to come up with a new concept with the superhero team, which gave birth to the Fantastic Four.
Wow.
When you talk Marvel, everybody automatically thinks either Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. Oftentimes what people forget, which came before Spider-Man, but right after Fantastic Four, is this guy.
There he is. I can hear the TV show music in my head.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Truly.
Now we're showing our age. Incredible Hulk. As you can see, he was gray when he first came out.
That's right. He doesn't turn green until the second.
Turns green in the second issue. Story behind that was Stan wanted to have this monster-type character. But the editor thought that it was too scary and was kind of pushing the boundaries of the comics code, which we have talked about before.
That's right.
With books being a little too scary. So they changed his color to green in the second issue, thinking that he would look more like a superhero to fall in line with what Marvel was doing and had planned going forward. But because he started off as gray, later in the 80s, they bring back the Gray Hulk. Then, the one that I'm sure everybody's waiting to see.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. This is the first Silver Age comic to hit $1 million in sales.
Wow. I believe it.
Another interesting story about this comic was when Stan Lee came up with the idea for doing Spider-Man, Marvel didn't believe in the character. They thought it wasn't going to go over well. They thought that being a bug, people wouldn't like it because it's too icky, or however you want to put it. But Stan, being Stan, kept pushing, and again, the editor was his uncle, so a little bit of nepotism there. Finally got his way. But they gave him a book that they were about to cancel. This was the last issue, and said, here, just to shut you up, you can put your story in this book. So they did. But the book sold like crazy. And of course, then Goodman takes credit saying, yeah, we wanted to launch Spider-Man all along.
Of course he did.
So we're going to give him his very own title.
Yeah, I just so much going on here. I love it.
Of course, they have to include the Fantastic Four, because that's the first Marvel superheroes.
Yeah, Would this be considered a team-up?
It's not a team-up per se. Little bit of a spoiler if you haven't read this. Spider-Man's newly acquired powers. Everybody knows the origin story where Uncle Ben gets killed by a burglar that he chose not to stop in the beginning of the story. So that the whole line with great power comes great responsibility was learned in this issue. But in #1, he did learn that lesson, but he also realized that he's got bills to pay. So he wanted to put his powers to use and make some money. So in this book, he tries to join the Fantastic Four thinking that it was a regular job and he'd get paid to be a superhero. Turns out they're a non-profit and they don't get paid. So he said, see ya. I don't know if you noticed in this. So did you read the #1?
I did.
Did you notice that there's a typo in the second story?
No.
Reread it again, They changed Peter Parker's name in the second story.
I did not catch that.
He's called Peter Palmer.
Oh no.
And they call him that through the whole story. So it wasn't a one-time typo. They goofed up the whole thing through the whole second half of the book. They call him Peter Palmer, the Amazing Spider-Man. Go reread it and you'll see it.
I will do that.
Thankfully, they've never changed it in any of the reprints. Every other reprint that I've seen still has the typos in there.
Oh my goodness.
So not only is this Spider-Man's #1 issue, it's the first appearance of Peter Palmer. Then, with the success of the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, the Hulk was, hate to say it wasn't a success. That book ended up getting canceled after only 6 issues. But with everything else going on, they wanted to keep the ball rolling. Then they introduced this guy, which has become a household name at this point. Anybody that doesn't know who Iron Man is probably living in a cave or under a rock somewhere.
Which is amazing because before he hit it, he was considered like a secondary or a tertiary character.
Yeah, B-level character at best.
What a great
with
cover.
The success of Iron Man came the other big guy, Journey into Mystery 83, first appearance of Thor.
Wow. Again, love these action covers. Just amazing.
And the stories are fun. As goofy as they were, looking back at them now, they're still fun to read.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're clearly meant for a younger audience, so, when you read these, you can't take them too seriously. But they're still fun. And, the list goes on and on. Marvel kept developing new characters, Doctor Strange, a host of supervillains, Doctor Doom. They brought back Submariner, Namor the Submariner, and Fantastic Four #4. The list goes on. And one thing that Marvel should really say is Stan Lee, since he wrote almost all of these stories. And that's the amazing thing when you think about it. All of these books were, and then some that came after, so not just these, lots of books were all written by Stan Lee.
Now, is that to say that all of them were also drawn by Jack Kirby, for those who may not know?
Most of them were. With Spider-Man, glad you brought that up, because a little interesting thing. Although this cover was done by Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko did the interior artwork and also did the artwork for Amazing Spider-Man. The story behind that was when Stan came up with the concept or the idea for Spider-Man, Jack clearly was his go-to guy. So he went to Jack first to come up with a layout of how Spider-Man would look. And when Jack did his version, all his characters are larger than life, big, heroic, and Stan wanted something a little more subdued because Peter Parker's supposed to be a teenager. So Jack's first version of Spider-Man, I wish I had printed out a copy of it, a picture of it, but he was really big and bulky, very superhero-like, very Jack Kirby-like.
Okay.
And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And Stan just didn't feel that was the right look for Spider-Man. So he went to another artist in the bullpen by the name of Steve Ditko and liked his version better, which is the clearly not as bulky and muscular. You can sort of tell he's about the slightly better than average build because he's a teenager under that costume.
That's right.
But for the most part, Jack Kirby did the art for almost everything else.
All right, so that's our show for today. If you like what you saw, hit that bell and subscribe. If you'd like to see the extended cut of this, go to our YouTube page. And again, we'll see you soon.